I recently spoke with Ghassan Andoni, a physics professor at Birzeit University in Palestine. He is also co-founder and spokesperson for the International Solidarity Movement, a nonviolent direct action organization located in Palestine. The International Solidarity Movement, or ISM, describes itself as a campaign against the Israeli occupation and for a just and viable peace. Ghassan, could you describe for me the conditions that existed when you decided to found the International Solidarity Movement? Please explain why you decided to found this organization.
Evidently, a severe violent crisis erupted and quickly turned into a war in which different kinds of arms, including heavy artillery, was used. The Palestinian community found itself being turned into a battlefield with tanks and Apaches hovering around and bombarding. The conditions have urged us that, you cannot just stand silent and watch, or you cannot just stay there waiting for the bullet to hit you or your neighbor. And at that time, we believed that we need to engage in this conflict. We need to engage in a nonviolent way. We need to try to influence it. We need to try to get people to understand what's going on. So the idea was to invite Palestinians and internationals to work together and resist the occupation in a peaceful, nonviolent way. And apparently, the appeal worked well because so many people were motivated, and we started getting many internationals joining groups of Palestinians in nonviolent direct actions. We believe peace warriors are most needed in conflict times.
What tactics do you use to resist the Israeli occupation, and why did you choose to adopt these tactics?
We realized that the only way to engage in this conflict is through nonviolent direct actions, where you actually, if you see injustice, you try to dismantle it. And you will be willing to take risks and be willing to take even violence conducted against you by the opponent without you using any level of violence against anybody. So from the beginning, we decided that nonviolent direct action should be the method, and I believe we are proven right. Secondly, we believe that nonviolent direct action should be employed in the intensive circles of the conflict, not on its fringes, to be effective. And thirdly, we believe that this is the only way to challenge the ability of occupation to control Palestinian life, and if occupiers lose control, you start the dismantling of occupation. That was our aim, and that's why we started targeting all kinds of barriers, roadblocks, checkpoints, the separation wall, whatever obstacles the occupation laid in front of civilian Palestinians, as well as encouraging defiance to oppression, like imposing curfews, incursions, home demolitions. Those were the fields we worked with, and those are the fields that international volunteers joined Palestinian volunteers in doing.
March 16, 2005 is the 2-year anniversary of the death of ISM volunteer Rachel Corrie. Would you please describe the activities that she was involved in with your organization? Would you also describe the circumstances that led to her death?
Firstly, I'd like to pay respect to her memory. It's a very painful memory to all of us in ISM, but mostly to Palestinians in Rafah, who are now commemorating Rachel in Rafah, near the Egyptian borders, at the hottest spot of the conflict. where people could be shot just because arriving close to that area. Rachel arrived and joined ISM similar to hundreds of international activists, have joined training and have decided to be located in Rafah. Rafah is the most difficult area. Operation there arrived at undescribable levels. Soldiers and in tanks don't leave their tanks, don't talk, they shoot and then talk. The level of risk is higher in Gaza than in the West Bank, where you have chances to talk to soldiers, to dialogue, to diffuse a conflict. There, you have to rely totally on the good side of the opponent. Rachel worked in very, very difficult circumstances, but showed a good level of self-restraint and good ability to stand in direct actions with following procedures that she was trained for. At that painful time when she was crushed by that army bulldozer, the caterpillar, it was seen. I mean, all the allegations that she wasn't, she was seen. Army was there 3 hours before the killing happened, and ISM activists lined up in front of them trying to prevent bulldozers from causing more damage to Palestinian civilian homes there. And then they moved away. They were aware that the activists are there. Our activists were wearing those orange light emitting jackets with clear identification. When the bulldozer came back, Rachel was alone in that area while others went to different homes there because they believed the army had left. She stopped, cried, shouted, tried to get the bulldozer driver to stop. To our best understanding, it was intentional. The intention was to hurt, and unfortunately, she was killed. That happened in a period where army had intensified its campaign against ISM, and it was followed by the brutal killing of Tom Horandel and the severely injuring Brian Avery. At that time, so many activists reported that they were so close to being hit by bullets fired by Israeli army. So our belief is that there has been an intentional policy trying to kick ISM out of Palestinian areas. Rachel I believe, paid her life because somebody decided a wrong policy.
A number of reports suggest that Rachel was protecting Palestinian weapon smuggling tunnels. How do you respond to these claims?
Look, in particular, Rachel was crushed to death in front of a Palestinian home well known to everybody, a Palestinian physician. Army have entered the home many times, have searched the place many times. There have been no tunnels, no whatsoever. If the army had any single clue of evidence that there have been any kind of tunnels used for smuggling weapons, they would have been on the headlines of all news. I think this is, even in sometimes there are tunnels and army is searching for them, but this is being used. This is being used in order to justify a criminal act.
Have the governments of Israel or the United States conducted an investigation into Rachel's death? What actions, if any, would you like to see either of these governments take?
First of all, Israel did conduct one army investigation where the army investigated itself and finally concluded that the killing was an accident, wasn't intentional, that the driver didn't see Rachel, which is a complete straight throw of lies. As we have run our investigation at that period, talked to everybody who was there and figured out, all the circumstances of what happened. Since the file was closed, Corrie family has attempted to try to get the United States to pressure Israel to do an investigation, an objective investigation. I do believe that there should be an objective investigation run by, not by army, but by trusted individuals, protected by courts, try to examine all the findings of the army and try to interview all people who were witnesses to that. And I believe the American administration has the duty to protect its citizens and has the duty to investigate whenever any one of them is killed in unclear conditions. We want the truth to appear, and we want a proper investigation position.
Recently, President Bush praised the Palestinians for holding, quote, largely free and fair elections. How would you describe the conditions under which the elections were held?
The reports of the many organizations that actually monitor the election process as run by Palestinians have actually reported that it was to a very good standard as compared even to advanced liberal democracies. In reality, there have been problems that forced us to run a campaign during the election period. There have been some candidates to local elections who have been arrested before candidacy. At least 3 candidates for the presidential elections were harassed. 2 of them were beaten, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti and the representative of the People's Party, while trying to enter Jerusalem. Israel never fulfilled the commitment of allowing election campaigns and freedom of movement even for candidates, especially in Jerusalem. Rarely people arrive to Gaza to campaign for presidency. There have been so many obstacles to the elections. Palestinians have run democratic elections under occupation. I even doubt that this is legitimate to run election under occupation. But nevertheless, because most Palestinians felt that there is a need for a change, there is a need to establish their institute on democratic basis, they took the risk and have gone to elections. And I'm really happy that the tradition has been established.
Israeli President Ariel Sharon and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas declared a truce on February 8th. How has this declaration affected everyday life for the average Palestinian?
It's not noticeable. That's the major problem. There have been declarations, there have been understandings in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, there have been obligations each side have casted. From the Israeli side, I can tell you there haven't been any movement in that direction. Israel promised to evacuate in 1 week 5 Palestinian cities. So far, none have been evacuated. Negotiations to hand over Jericho started by talking about evacuating Jericho region and removing military checkpoints that strangled the city. Right now, the agreement stands on redeploying forces from inside the city of Jericho. I just want to tell you that Israeli forces are not deployed inside the city of Jericho. So the agreement is totally symbolic. People will face the same conditions, the same military checkpoints, the same treatment, even if the redeployment in the city of Jericho happens tonight as scheduled. Invasions or incursions inside Palestinian cities and villages also continue. Of course, things were more complicated by the Tel Aviv bombing, and then a halt on the process was imposed, and Israel took that also as an excuse to freeze what was described as needed confidence-building measures. It's painful. I think anybody who has been engaged in any kind of talks or negotiations with the Israeli government have expressed frustration. There are lots of talks, there are lots of declarations of intentions. There is very little changing on the ground.
Recently, the Lebanese people have been launching massive peaceful protests demanding an end to the Syrian occupation of their country. President Bush and other world leaders have called for an immediate end to the Syrian occupation. How are Palestinians viewing these events? What lessons are they drawing?
I think Palestinians have mixed feelings. Most of them feel with Lebanese and do understand what a foreign control over the community life and its institutes means, because we suffer it, we have been suffering it for the last decade. Emotionally speaking, the ones who can more understand Lebanese in their desire to become totally free from any outside pressure or the influence of Syrian troops or Syrian intelligence is understood by Palestinians, is deeply understood by Palestinians. For Palestinians, the added pain is hypocrisy. If compared to the Israeli occupation or even presence in the Palestinian territories, the Syrian is a very mild case. First of all, the Syrians were invited as peacekeeping force, have been there upon agreement with the government. Now, some people suspect the legitimacy of the government, maybe, and hadn't demolished Lebanese home, haven't arrested Lebanese directly, haven't deported anybody, haven't annexed any of the Lebanese territories. Now, if you compare that to what Israel has been doing in the Palestinian occupied territories, you would feel the pain that nobody is standing and saying, withdraw immediately. You have to leave immediately. If people want to stand for liberty and democracy and freedom, they cannot be hypocritic. What causes most pain is this level of severe hypocrisy that exists in especially the United States policy and in general in Western country policies.
I'd like to turn to some questions about the policies and positions of the international solidarity movement. Many people believe that while the actions of the Israeli military may not be entirely just, the actions of Palestinian suicide bombers leave Israel little choice but to respond militarily. How would you like to see Israel respond to suicide bombings?
I disagree with this argument. I mean, if any case of killing in this conflict needs a response, then it will be endless killing. I mean, there have been 4,000 Palestinians killed directly by Israelis, Israeli army or Israeli settlers. So I don't think there is a point in talking about revenge-based actions. And therefore, I think what needs to happen, which I doubt that the Israeli government would go with, that people have to appreciate that a 4 years intensive conflict will leave so much of hard feelings and desires for revenge. Both sides have the duty to work against them from their side. Both sides have the duty to try to break down the cycle of violence. What Israel described as response to attacks is actually seen by Palestinians as initiating attacks. And this is a cycle. If both sides are allowed to run a policy of revenge, to run a policy of responding to each act, then it will be endless. So many more people will be killed, and the conflict will be totally out of control.
Would you give us some detail about life under the occupation? Can you describe a typical day in the life of a Palestinian?
Well, I will describe an ordinary day. I live in Bethlehem and I work in Birzeit University, which is 35 kilometers away. It should be 40 minutes drive. That used to be the case. First of all, I'm not allowed to drive my car on roads. Every Palestinian doesn't have the right to drive his private car on any road. The only available option is taxis. I line up at a minimum of 4 checkpoints in my way from Bethlehem to my university. At each checkpoint, on average, I spend about half an hour to 2 hours. On average, I encounter every day extra 2 or 3 fly point checkpoints where soldiers stop the jeep and stop you and search you and hold you for, probably 10 minutes to hours. I had to rent an apartment near the university because I cannot go back to my family every day I, on average, spend 4 hours, 5 hours on roads with all the humiliation and with all the frustration that I face by those young soldiers who enjoy humiliating Palestinians, thinking that they are taking revenge. That's one side of it. The other side of it, I can't enter Jerusalem by any means. I can't go to pray. I can't go for medication. And I can't travel outside the country. In all of those aspects, I need Israeli permits, which are not tangible and rarely offered, and sometimes offered and cancelled at the same day. I live all of my day waiting for the second alert, because the second alert, Israeli security declares, means I won't be able either to reach my family or my university. Now, I consider myself as a lucky person because I still have a job. So many people don't. So many people are actually sieged inside their cities. So many Palestinian communities, including mine in Bethlehem area, is now totally surrounded by the wall. Most of our land have been expropriated and taken to the wall, in addition to expropriation to build the many settlements that are surrounding there. You leave your home not knowing that you are for sure coming. You leave your kid and figuring out whether you will see him again afterwards or whether there will. And it's a systematic, slow, daily torture and harassment that you feel it on your skin and accumulated inside you as frustration and anger. And I'm talking about a middle-class Palestinian who still manages work, doesn't have financial difficulties. Now, you could even look at how would be the situation of people living in misery in refugee camps or villages or crowded cities.
What have ISM volunteers been doing recently? Can you describe some of your latest activities?
Recently, ISM have been engaged mostly in villages that have decided to stand up against the expropriation of their land and the construction of the separation wall, mainly in 2 regions, which is northwest Jerusalem and Hebron area. And I'm really happy that local Palestinian groups are taking the initiative, organizing their community, training for nonviolence, and actually leading the actions. And right now, ISM is acting as a partner, as a support to those groups, and whatever activists we have are joining Palestinians in this struggle. We believe this is the most important struggle